the coolest station in the world. I am Dr. T.
I'm Dr. Fishta.
And welcome to our show this week. We are talking about anxiety. What exactly is anxiety? Is it just simply a bundle of nerves that we need to tell people to sit down and shut up? Or is it really a mental health disorder? Let's talk about it now.
Let's talk about it, Dr. T. And, I was talking to some folks before the show, and I told them that, the show today is about anxiety. The reaction, well, this is how I deal with anxiety. We all have anxiety. And often it's due to job interviews, some trouble in your relationship, finances, and all kinds. The big question here, how high is the anxiety? What kind of reaction do you have to it? Basically, prolonged stress that turns into some form of physiological reaction. Will it be chest pain, difficulty with breathing, nightmares, sweating, things of that nature that are persistent enough where they actually interfere with your overall functioning. It'll be work, social event, and hours and hours.
That is right. But when anxiety disorders are the most common type of mental health distress in the United States, affecting about 4 million adults. I don't think that people really realize that. And while we may experience the physical symptoms, we may not realize how much anxiety actually affects our body. Because anxiety actually triggers the area in the brain that detects response to threats, to our or perceived threats that we are experiencing. So let's talk a little bit about the brain science. Well, first, let's define what anxiety is. I think you did that, but let's give a clearer definition for our listening audience.
Basically a prolonged stress that it warrants some form of a brain reaction in order, and your fight or flight mechanisms are activated, hence activating your central nervous system with hyper alertness, reaction, and so forth. Now, for example, if this building was to be on fire right now, you and I are going to get up and run out of here and hopefully grab someone on the way out, right? So in order to do that, what happens, your heart starts pumping blood, your muscles start to contract, your central nervous system is super activated.
Right. And we're talking about the amygdala when we're talking like
correct.
that.
It's fight or flight, right? This is survival.
Or freeze.
Then you have oxygen flowed into your vitals. You're not sitting there and thinking, should I run or should I stay? It's just an automatic reaction.
Right.
So now you said the key word there is the perceived threat that makes this anxiety as we know it from a psychological point of view. Often unconscious, right, with generalized anxiety disorder. So this perceived threat does the same thing as it would if there is fire, where it activates all our physiological components in order to react to something. You look around, there's nothing to react to, yet your body is acting as such.
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking about the brain and how that adrenaline and the cortisol within the brain is released, and it signals these hormones to either run, go to a safe haven, and again we always forget that freeze.
Correct.
Because some people get into an anxious situation and they don't know what to do, so they just stand there. Have you ever saw someone in a fire and they're just standing there like a deer in headlights and they don't know what to do, or they're walking down the street, a car is coming and they just stand there and they get hit by the car instead of moving out of the way?
Yeah.
That's that freeze response.
Because you only have 3 possible options to respond to a perceived threat through survival mechanisms. 1 is to fight it, 2 is to flight it, and the only other possible way to deal with it is where a person plays dead, right? When you think of that bear, when it shows up, you're going to fight it, try to run it, or you just play dead, hopefully one eats you. So those are...
Now, I don't think that works with black bears, though. Those they have a whole different mindset.
So with that in mind, though, you can see that given where we are socially speaking and financially speaking in so many other ways, that many of these mechanisms are activated naturally, which is not necessarily a bad thing until and unless it lasts us long enough, persistent enough, where now it becomes a problem where it interferes with your functioning. And also, as you mentioned, some of those elements there, when you break down anxiety, you have the generalized anxiety, which is the most common one, right? You have six people per every 100 Americans who actually have generalized anxiety disorder. Then you have the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Typical, that can come in many ways, but one easier way to describe that is with our vets coming back from the war, so to speak, where certain parts of their brain have been activated in a way that now they're hyper alert, there's problems with sleep. And there's in cases where vets describe the garbage day, where garbages are outside, where their anxiety really hits them hard because they think even unconsciously or even consciously about the day in wartime where anything could blow up in their hands, so to speak.
And the 4th of July is one of those main holidays that trigger individuals that have been in war times or combat, and it really startles them and can trigger some really unpleasant behaviors. I had an uncle-in-law who suffered from post-traumatic stress, and at times he would stand in the living room just rocking back and forth. I used to think he would fall because he was teetering so far front to back, and he was really in a daze. He didn't recognize anyone that was around him. It was literally like he was there by himself. And if you touched him during that time, you never knew what you were going to get. So
correct, is that reactive activation that is unpredictable, and again, it's the person is in a frightening situation. Again, consciously or not, but all these elements we talked about are activated and ready to act and respond to something. And then you have the OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and many of these disorders have anxiety as a common theme, so to speak. Then you have the childhood trauma. We already know from studies that when a child has some clinical trauma early in life, not only they will have most likely anxiety later in life, but even developmental delays and other problems that could come along with it, including lack of focus and attention, which could appear to be ADHD. If medicated with stimulants, now you're on the risk of being stimulated, central nervous system. So we've had cases where a person can literally have a acute psychotic episode due to stimulants when actually the anxiety is the common denominator in what's going on in their lives.
And then there's also panic attacks that could be associated with individuals that suffer from anxiety. Like you were saying, those symptoms would be the heart palpitations, the sweating, the fidgeting,
fatigueness.
Exactly.
And panic attacks, there can be most often conscious, but they can be unconscious as well, because when you think of a person who's having nightmares and they wake up in sweat and shaking and heart palpitations
and can hardly breathe.
Correct. They actually have had a panic attack when their consciousness has been asleep, yet other physiological elements are actually at work, which really makes for a hard start in a person's day, where now it leads into problems at work, in relationships, and really most social settings.
Anxiety can also make it bad for the brain to reason rationally and to hold on to, it causes it to hold on to those negative memories.
Correct.
So we have to really let our people know how anxiety actually rewires that brain and remembers those failures, the threats, and the dangers that you experience, and really buries those happy memories that you have experienced.
There is different schools of thoughts in this, right? You have the neuroscience that actually says, and they can see it through brain scans, that when there is trauma, that brain functioning changes. Certain chemicals are operating in ways that it's not, for most people, it's not the same. And the reason is theoretically that due to trauma, certain brain parts are activated now that they create pathways, so to speak. So when you talk about being, say, logical when you're under anxiety, is very difficult, because think about the scenario in fire. We're not going to sit there and logically have a conversation. We're going to react based on survival skills, so to speak. So
Right.
that's why when you see a person who has anxiety and they're not reasoning with you, it's not like they don't want to. They already know they're in trouble and they're trying to suppress it.
Right, because that
Often-
triggers through the hypothalamus.
That's correct. That's correct. Which again, it floods the brain with certain chemicals in order to react to a situation. Yet a person looks around and everybody seems to be calm and there is no crisis, so to speak, going on. And it's often stigmatized, Dr. T. There is people where, well, this is how you deal with it. Why don't you understand that here are your triggers and just go on with your... Well, it's easier said than done. No one wants to be anxious in a way that is clinical, meaning
Right.
interfering with their overall functioning. It's a very, very debilitating disorder that is often minimized by general public. Now, let's keep in mind that anxiety and depression is going to be one of the number one leading disability for people worldwide, costing the world billions of dollars in production and other ways.
Especially today with the COVID-19, all the depression and anxiety that people are experiencing. I know I've spoken with quite a few clients that have expressed their concerns and feeling anxious, even with allowing their children to go back to school.
Correct. Now, that is already a stressful process, right? Because your baby boy, baby girl, now it's 17, 18, 19, going away, right? The kids themselves are under pressure, right, to perform academically, moving away from home. You have all those elements. Then you have parents vicariously experiencing similar stress and anxiety. Now, you take this COVID pandemic in a mix, and you can see how that can really, really influence the person's overall mindset, and again activate certain parts that are unproductive and not necessary, so to speak, for normal functioning.
Right. Now, as we move on, we're going to have Dr. Laura Thompson come in. She's going to be calling in from Colorado, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about those anxieties that students experience in the at the college level. And let me remind you all that you are watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest radio station in the world. And you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, IG, Twitch, and all social media platforms, including Amazon and Apple TV.
And while we're on commercial part of it, let's make some more money, Dr. T. And also, we want to talk about Rick Ramirez, who is your trusted real estate advisor. When I talked to him, he said to me that time is your most valuable asset. When you work with me, not a second will be wasted. When it comes to real estate, he is there to get you from point A to point B as seemingly as possible, and I have personal experience with this gentleman. He has been our real estate agent for my family, my brothers and I for several years now, and we are very pleased with him. Again, Rick Ramirez, and you can reach him at 248-789-5888. Also, our other sponsor, Omega Hog and Dog from Ferndale. Deli, breakfast and lunch, beautiful food, 2100 Hilton Road on Hilton, just north of 9 Mile in Ferndale. If you're in the area, please stop by and visit. The service is excellent and food is excellent.
Well, we would like to thank both of our host sponsors for supporting this show. And we, guess what, you all, have Dr. Laura Thompson on the line with us. Dr. Thompson?
Hello. How are you both?
We are doing well. We want to first thank you for calling in and taking time out of your busy schedule. And tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a licensed professional counselor. I work here in Denver, Colorado. I've worked in higher education for 25 years. I teach for New York University. I'm an adjunct professor there. And I am the co-founder of an organization called P3 Mental Health Advisors, and we provide mental health consulting and training for organizations, both within the U.S. and lots of organizations that send students abroad. So I've got my hands in lots of pots, and I'm just happy to be here today.
Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for being here with us today. And it's October 1 today, and school has started just a few weeks ago, and there has been a lot going on with that. And given your experience with universities, with students, parents from different levels, what are your thoughts? What's going on? Before you come online, we were talking about anxiety with students as well as parents and things of this nature. Give us your general thoughts with respect to anxiety, students and their families in universities now.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I just want to say that we live in really anxious times. So anxiety is something that's common across all ages, and it's really common. It's part of the human experience, right? So to think that we're never going to feel anxious or anxiety is not being very realistic. Anxiety is the number one reason that college students come to university counseling centers nationwide. So it's a big deal. And I was listening to, just before I came on, and it's a common issue worldwide, right? So lots of people are feeling anxious, and there's lots of reasons, and you've already talked about some of those reasons before I came on. But we've got uncertain times. There's economic challenges. We've got this COVID pandemic that's creating a lot of anxiety. There's health issues. There's some people are anxious. Their substance use causes more feelings of anxiety. For others, histories of trauma, like you talked about, relationship challenges. So there's lots of factors that can contribute to us feeling anxious.
Absolutely.
And it's a matter of just what do we do with it, right?
Right.
That's a very good question, Dr. Thompson, and I assume that you're hearing from students, from faculty, and from parents as well. And obviously, when kids go away, that affects the whole family unit in so many ways. And many parents we talk to, oftentimes they're just nervous. They're again vicariously living through their children's anxieties and stressors, so to speak. And they can see, they pick up. Their children are more anxious now. Again, we have the COVID, the social unrest going on, and overall, as people, we are more anxious. What is your observation with respect to those dynamics?
Well, I think, like you said, every single year, I'm seeing more and more students reporting feeling anxious, right? So there is an upward trend, and I have to say one thing I don't think I heard you mention yet is just the impact of social media. Mm-hmm. That's another thing. We've got people who are online, they're on their phones a lot, mm-hmm. and it's fun to be on our phones, but when we're constantly looking at Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram and we're seeing everybody's best pictures and their best mm-hmm. lives, right? Mm-hmm. And, I always say we don't usually put our bad days up on social media. Some people do, but most of our pictures that go up are our better pictures, right?
That's correct.
Exactly.
We have a perception that our lives are perfect and theirs aren't. And that can also create feelings of anxiety and social anxiety, right? Just this feeling that like I'm going to be judged by others. And so that can also be a challenging dynamic.
Exactly. Dr. Thompson, can you tell us some of the main anxieties that students have expressed to you?
Oh, goodness, yes. I think there's sort of a generalized anxiety where people just come in and they're just more wired towards anxious, right? Mm-hmm. They, I ask them, when did you first feel this way? They've been feeling this way for a really long time. Sometimes I hear about their family histories, and it's understandable that they're feeling anxious. Sometimes there's family histories, like if mom's really anxious and dad's really anxious, well, guess what? There's a better chance that they may be anxious too. Part of it.
So that's that genetic link. That genetic link is what you're talking about?
Yes,
mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So there, and also I think that there's sort of the environmental. It's like if we see how mom is acting or dad is acting, mm-hmm. sometimes, it's learned.
I'm so glad that you touched on that. A lot of people don't realize as parents that your children are watching. You're their first role model. So a lot of behaviors that they learn and implement happens in the home first.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't want to, detract from sort of the biological piece or the genetic piece, but if we are surrounded by people that have a hard time sort of coping and managing, those are our role models, right?
Right.
So there's sort of this generalized anxiety where people kind of feel anxious a lot of the time across the board. There's social anxiety, which I mentioned briefly before, where people go into social settings and it just makes them nervous, right? And they they feel just sort of this uneasiness. They're fearful of being evaluated negatively by their peers potentially, and people are going to look at me. I'm going to walk into that party and everyone's going to be staring at me. So that can be a really challenging type of anxiety for and it's very common with younger people. Hopefully as we get older, we get more and more comfortable in our skin. Not everybody, but, I think ideally. Then there's also existential anxiety, right? And that's like something that impacts a lot of us as humans, right? It's like trying to figure out, like, what am I doing in this life and what's my purpose on this planet?
Absolutely.
And does my life have any meaning? If someone dies and we lose somebody that's close to us, or maybe we get an illness and we're managing our grief, we can just kind of go, hey, what is this about, or what's the point, or this isn't fair. So those bigger questions can also create a sense of anxiety that's, again, it's really a part of the human experience. So it's like, okay, how do I manage it?
Right. And I know another anxiety for students when they are first time college students, being away from home can cause anxiety. Having to share a room with a roommate, pretty much a stranger, and now this person is imposing on your personal space, and you have to now share things, and this can cause anxiety. Have you had any students that have experienced that, or are you mainly online with teaching?
Oh goodness, since I work with students in multiple capacities, absolutely. In fact, I just got done working with a young woman who was having roommate struggles, right? And it's like they're new to school, and with COVID, again, it adds another layer because it's like, okay, if my roommate's out partying, he or she could be bringing that that back to me, right? Or if my roommate's traveling, they could be bringing it back, and so. Just going to school, adjusting to new living circumstances, having to share space, often with people who have different lifestyles than us, like their habits, their sleeping habits, all the stuff could be different.
And even cultural differences.
What were you going to say?
I said, and even cultural differences.
Absolutely. And all of these things come up. And sometimes we go away from family and we realize, oh, everybody in the world isn't exactly like my family, or the way they were raised is really different from me. And so that can be a source of anxiety as well. And then I think one other thing that comes to mind is just this notion that, for some people too, their parents have been highly active and engaged in their lives, right? And their parents have been planning things and organizing their lives, and then they come to college and they're like, what do I do? Like, how do I organize my life and my time?
Right. And that is a challenge. I was talking to a friend of mine's maybe a couple of weeks ago, and his daughter was having conflict with her roommates, and she wanted to change her room. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. How about, has she talked to her roommates? Has she gone to her RA or the dorm director, or talked to someone in housing? What has she done first? Because he wanted to go up there and move her out. I'm like, no, that's not what you're going to do. Now you're hovering.
Absolutely. And Dr. T, I really appreciate that you said that, because I think, philosophically, so much of going to university and sort of developmentally is like teaching people to sort of become adults, right?
And independent.
And it's like, how do I do this adulting thing? And how do we help young people learn to advocate for themselves rather than, running to a parent or someone else to take care of it for them. It's like we have to encourage people to be able to go and speak up and advocate for their needs. And I always say in a respectful manner, of course, that's really important. But for parents, I just always encourage them to say, hey, I'd encourage your child, your adult, soon to be an adult child, to go and ask for themselves and encourage them to do that, because that's so important.
Right. But I think also some of that is fear of the parent too, of an anxiety of not having that child in the home anymore, because parents do have some anxiety with their children going off to college, if they're going to do well in school, if they're going to be able to make friends. Are they going to get hurt, party too much, and start drinking? So I think parents have that fear as well. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on about that. I think, a lot of times people sort of, I don't know how to say it, their anxiety trickles down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a parent's anxious, automatically it's so easy to kind of project that onto their child, right?
Exactly.
Son or daughter. And so I say, I think that it's really important for parents to kind of learn to manage themselves as well, right? We all have to work on managing ourselves, and parents have to kind of, learn how to sort of let go of the reins. And, people do it in their own time, in their own way, but just recognizing that this is such a critical time developmentally in people's lives when they step away from home. And, this sort of like balance of sort of challenge and support.
Right.
Like, how do I challenge my child to go out on their own, but how do I support them as they do that?
Right, as they gain and learn how to have some type of autonomy in their life.
Yes.
Dr. Thompson, you just hit at so many levels, and the picture. And I understand a lot of kids, my hope is, are doing well, but let's look at some. You touched upon developmental or existential problems that that age children go through. There is a need and a demand for academic performance. You have the separation from family. You have the pandemic going on. You have the social unrest going on, and the college campuses were known to party on weekends. We have our U of M, the state here, and others. Now we're looking into possibly a different kind of scenario. We know Adderall use has increased, and you talk to kids in college, and they either take it themselves or know someone who does. Are we in trouble here, Dr. Thompson? What give us your thoughts here? Where do we go from here, generally as people? What are your thoughts?
Wow, these are some big questions, and I like to remain hopeful in terms of I wouldn't work in the business that I work in. Working with students, and then even working as a mental health provider. Like, I would not do this work if I didn't believe in people's capacity, right, to be better and to do better. Substance use is one of my areas of. I have some training in this domain as well, and students do use a lot of substances. Not all students, but some are using a lot, right?
Right.
And
you're in Colorado, right? Isn't it legal in Colorado for marijuana?
Well, it's legal if you're over 21. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of students who are using a lot of substances, and marijuana, of course, in different ways.
The same with alcohol. At least here in Michigan, you have to be 21, but we also understand that under 21 people can get their hands on every once in a while.
You can get access to anything. And before we move on, it is 5:29, and you are watching In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest radio station in the world, and we are talking anxiety with Dr. Laura Thompson.
Dr. Thompson, can you expand a bit, and I assume you deal with parents as well oftentimes, either directly or indirectly through the students that you see. And I think you touched up earlier on this, where parents and Dr. T too, where parents need to focus on their own mental health, emotional health, and so forth, that can possibly be even very helpful to the students themselves. What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. Parents, we're human, and everybody has their own challenges, right? And people could be doing really well in life, and then there's an unexpected loss. There could be a relationship breakup. There could be a diagnosis. There could be a loss of work. I mean, there's so many different factors that can influence, parents and people in society, right? Even those who aren't parents. And I think for parents, it's so critical that they acknowledge kind of what's my side of the road, what's my child's side of the road, and what do we share, right? And it's so important that parents manage their own stuff and don't project that onto their son or daughter, because that can just create more challenges for this young person as they're trying to navigate life and school and everything that's on their plate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point there, because often we hear parents saying that, all my life, at least for the last 18 years, or all my adult life, it's been about raising children, caring for them, providing for them. Now they're gone, so to speak, and obviously there's that empty nest syndrome. And also what I think what you're referring to is possibly the purpose now has changed. You talk about existential with students, but then the parents are going through existential crisis as well. So you have their children students, and you have the parents, and it just seems like that it can inflate these emotional states that often create anxiety.
Absolutely. And it's just, you're really speaking to transition, right? That
Mm-hmm.
life is filled with transitions. And, for somebody whose a primary identity has been that of a parent for, 17, 18 years, and then all of a sudden their child goes off, and whether it's to university or whether it's to the service or whether it's to work and they move out, there's an adjustment that has to take place, and there's a grieving process for a lot of people. I mean, certainly there's parents out there who are having parties the minute their person moves off, but there's for a lot of people it's just a change, and the home might be quieter now. Maybe parents are like, okay, who are we as a couple now in the absence of our child living in this space? Yes. So there's a lot of things that can emerge, for sure.
Right. Now, the main thing that I got out of that, from what you said, is change can cause anxiety. These are transitions that people are going through, and with the transition, the main thing that is happening is something in your life is changing. And there's an unawareness that triggers that anxiety, the fear of the unknown.
Absolutely. It can be a fear of unknown, and it could just be like, there's times when we are really excited for change, but it still can be really overwhelming and contribute to feelings of anxiety. Maybe it's a new job, and we're moving across the country for that new job, and how exciting, but now we have to go set up life in a new place where we might not know anybody. We have to figure out our resources, et cetera, et cetera. And so, change can absolutely be a huge source of stress and anxiety in our lives.
Yes. I know for me, when I have to present somewhere, the night before, I have a real bad problem falling off to sleep because I'm so anxious. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to miss my alarm? What if I oversleep? What if I forget my flash drive? So all these thoughts are going through my head, and some people don't realize that that's anxiety.
Absolutely. And I think one thing, that's sort of like you're touching upon almost like the notion of performance anxiety, right? Some people, when they've got to get out there and give a speech or a presentation or, be in front of other people, that can be incredibly anxiety provoking, and I've certainly worked with people who struggle in those domains as well. But for you, I think it's sort of figuring out, is this just the night before, and then the night after my presentation I can go back and get some good sleep and then kind of fall back into my normal sleep patterns, or is it this sort of ongoing, sustained inability to get rest?
Well,
right?
since we're getting personal, it's just that night, the night before. It's always those jitters. And I think that's normal for people that are on the stage, even actors and singers and even politicians. They get nervous sometimes when you have to speak in front of a person.
Politicians do.
They like to talk, right?
and this is something that I want you to extend a bit on, Dr. Thompson. For the parents listening there, how can people realize what can they look for in order? And I know this is obviously every individual is very different, but generally speaking, how do people know this is something more now that warrants to come to your counseling office, say, or reach out for professional help? What are some general signs and symptoms that you're seeing with students you're working with?
Well, I think, we've talked about sleep. And so again, is it differentiating? Is it just a one night thing that I'm having a hard time sleeping, or is it becoming sort of a regular, like, I don't know why, I just can't sleep. I'm just struggling with sleep. It could be a frequent feeling of sort of uneasiness. There could be irritability, tension. For some people, it's just a sense of sort of imminent danger and just constantly kind of being really worried and wound tight. It could be the heart pounding. You mentioned that earlier. Racing thoughts. It's just like my mind's scattered and everything's happening so quickly, and it's hard for me to be clear. It could be that. It could be rumination. And rumination is like, we can all think about challenges that may have happened in our lives, right? Maybe a relationship ended, and you find out that person's quickly with someone else, right? Or maybe they were with someone else before you even ended the relationship. Rumination is just playing it over and over and over and over again in our head and having a hard time turning that, putting on the off button, right? Or flipping the off switch. It's just constant replaying things. So I think to answer your question, it's when it becomes something where you're starting to notice that it's getting in the way of your regular functioning, right? Like you can't just say, okay, I'm going to go for a run and just shake this off, or I'm going to go put on some music and dance and wow, I feel better. All those things are great things, but if you're employing different skills and different approaches and strategies to try to make it feel better, and it's just not, that could be a great time to go in and talk to someone, right?
Right.
But I also, sorry.
Go ahead. Keep going.
No, I just wanted to say, though, I also, as a mental health provider, I believe so wholeheartedly that, I like the notion of destigmatizing all of this. There is nothing wrong with just needing sometimes to go in and talk to somebody and say, I just got to get this off my chest. I just need to talk to somebody and process. I'd love to work this through with somebody. We don't need to wait until we are struggling in a large way before we reach out for assistance and support.
That's
right?
correct.
And there's different ways of doing that too.
And we know from studies that once anxiety goes over those clinical levels, then oftentimes it can get worse before it gets better. And it's a double-edged sword for people, right? You mentioned stigma, Dr. Thompson, which Dr. T and I, that is one of our goals, targeting stigma in education. Now, you can imagine a person who's having a lot of anxiety. Not only they're dealing with their anxiety, but now they're also suppressing it because they may not want their friends or all the roommates to know and so forth, which becomes very, very difficult. Dr. Thompson, given that you also mentioned, we did earlier, that the performance is affected, I assume that you often could see it in your students' grades or academic performance, so to speak. And you, we're very happy to have you because you sit on both sides. You're the mental health and you also faculty that do very heavy lifting in teaching. So what are your thoughts there with respect to academic performance? And I'm sure we're going to have studies later, but what we got?
Well, I mean, absolutely, it can inhibit performance, right? Like I was just talking to a student last week who said, I know the material, but every time I go into that room, I forget it, or I get so panicky. Like she just said, I'm a terrible test taker. I'm a terrible test taker. And, at some point, before we're finished today, I do want to talk about strategies and, maybe a little bit later.
Oh, we were going to roll into that soon.
Good, awesome. But just this notion of like this person has decided that she's a terrible test taker, and then test signals panic, right? Mm-hmm. And so we spent a lot of time last week really talking about ways that maybe she can shift some of her ideas about what it means to take a test because she knows the material, and telling herself over and over again, I'm terrible at this, I'm terrible at this, this is awful, I'm terrible at this. That's certainly not going to help her feel calmer, right? It's going to get her activated, and you mentioned it earlier, when we're activated, when our brains are in sort of this fight or flight mode, or freeze, but in this case, I mean, it's both. Freeze, she blanks out, right? Yep. So fight, flight, or freeze, when our brains are in that space, they don't perform as well. It's harder to make good decisions, right?
Right.
It just is.
Right, because a lot of people don't know when you experience anxiety and stress, the stress actually shrinks the hippocampus. And that's the part of the brain that processes long-term and contextual memory. So if over years of experiencing poor performance during testing times, or being told that, okay, well, you know what, you have test taking anxiety, that is what that person is going to remember time and time again, and not remember when they did do positive or scored an A on an exam, because the brain is now have rewired itself to think negatively and about those negative impacts that they have experienced.
Absolutely, and I think you really touch upon this notion that words are powerful. What we tell ourselves are powerful. What other people tell us over and over again, those words matter.
Yeah, Dr. Thompson, and you alluded to it already, we did a nice portrayal of the problem here. Given your experience, again, sitting on both sides of the fence in your daily work, what are some strategies that you found or you think can be effective? And I know it's hard because every individual is very unique, but generally speaking, can you talk to that, please?
Absolutely. Well, first off, I always like to tell people that I believe that feeling better is the result of lots of small changes, right? So a lot of times we have this notion that like, I'm going to do this one thing and everything's going to be better. And I think that's putting a lot of pressure on one thing, right? And even sometimes with medication. Sometimes medication does help. A lot of times it does, potentially. But we have this idea that I'm going to take this pill and all the rest of it's all going to go away. And that's just not how life works, right? That's not how our bodies work necessarily. So lots of different strategies. One is just like breathing and meditation. And I'm going to start with breathing, right? We can change our physiological state in a minute or two by just taking some big, deep breaths, right? And I do this with people if they come into my office, or now they're not coming to my office because we're not seeing people in person, but like if they tell me, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious, sometimes I'll say, should we do some deep breaths? Would you want to do that? And so we do this, and we just take full breaths and maybe 5. Right? If I'm standing in a line and I'm feeling anxious somewhere, maybe I'm at the airport and there's, crowds and all of that, and it just feels overwhelming, I will sometimes just say, Laura, just breathe. and I just remind myself to take a few deep breaths. That can make a huge difference. In a very short period of time, you get to take your breath wherever you are, right?
Right.
So
I'm taking some now.
awesome. And I think that the key is full breaths, right? Because when we get anxious or really nervous, we do tend to do shallow breathing. And so it's fast and shallow. So sometimes I'll almost imagine, like if I'm sitting down, one analogy that helps for me is like I'll almost pretend like from where I'm seated, I will pretend there's an elevator going all the way from like where I'm seated all the way up through my head. And I'll just imagine this as I inhale, the breath going all the way to my head and up to the top, and then I exhale and I take it all the way back down. And that's a way to kind of imagine taking a really full breath.
Right.
So breathing.
So that's an actual mindfulness technique, deep breathing. That I love that strategy. Is there anything else besides the deep breathing?
Oh goodness, yes. I have a whole list I'm going to try to roll through. Meditation apps. You know, some people are like, whoa, this is too airy-fairy for me, or this is too, whatever. But the bottom line is there are so many free meditation apps now. There's one that I really love called Insight Timer, and it's free. Download that, put that app on your phone. There are thousands of guided meditations on there. Some of them are 2 minutes long, some of them are an hour long. So you can pick, look up meditation for anxiety reduction, meditation for sleep, meditation for peace. I mean, there's so many different titles that you can look up. If you don't like one of the voices, you can say, you know what, I'm going to change. I'm going to listen to a different person. So that, free meditation app is a really great way to, it's something to try out, right?
Right.
Say, give it a try.
Right.
Lots of other things. Time outdoors. Nature can be really healing. So even if you're, stuck in an office or you're inside and it's snowing in Michigan, get outside. I grew up in Michigan, by the way, so I know all about the weather.
There you go.
And get outside and just get some fresh air. That can be tremendously helpful. Exercise is another one.
Well, before you move on, let me ask, what do you think about grounding exercises? I know you said go out and experience nature, but there's a specific technique called grounding. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with grounding techniques. I don't know if I'm thinking the same that you are, but what are you thinking?
Okay, so this is more of a holistic perspective where you go out in nature, you take your shoes off, and you really dig your feet into the grass or the earth. And I'm a tree hugger, so
hug a tree.
yeah. So I go hug and fill up trees and everything like that. So some people think I'm a little perverted, but it centers me.
And you know what? That's what matters, right? And so I love that you brought up grounding because that's like a physical grounding technique. You are physically putting your feet onto the earth. And there are notions that like when we're more connected to, the grass or the soil, that it can help us feel more grounded, right? I mean, there's research out there that shows that gardening, right? There's lots of great gardening area in lots of land in Michigan that's gardened, and just getting your hands in soil can be incredibly healing, right?
Yes.
So you, like really connecting with nature and the earth is one type of grounding. But another type of grounding activity, it could just be almost like, there's emotional grounding where I'm just going to, like a calming grounding where I'm just going to tell myself, like, take a deep breath, all is well, I've got this, I can manage whatever comes my way, just so sort of a soothing grounding with
positive affirmations,
positive messages. There could be a type of grounding sometimes is mere distraction, right? I'm just going to distract myself, and it could be there's this notion that our brains can only hold like one idea at a time. It's hard if I'm focused on I'm going to name all of the actors I can think of, starting through the alphabet. So I'm going to say A, B, C, D, and I'm going to go through the alphabet and try to name an actor, or maybe a music group, or a jazz group, or, it could be movies. There's so many different things, but that might sound really silly, but just getting our minds focused on something else other than like, oh my God, I'm so anxious right now, I feel so overwhelmed. If we can get our minds to think of other things, that can be helpful. There's soothing grounding. It could be, touching just, children have blankets, right, sometimes, and the silky on the blanket, they love the texture. So, having a comfortable, a cozy blanket. It could be, some people, maybe there's like a rock that feels really smooth and just touching it has a calming feeling. So there's lots of different grounding exercises, but those are just a few.
And what about aromatherapy? Do you think that's helpful in reducing anxiety?
You know what? Our senses are very powerful. So I think that the overall message is you got to do what works. And I think we got to be open to trying different things. Some people have they'll smell something and they're like lavender is supposed to be a very calming scent, right? And so it's like, if we smell that, or maybe put a few drops in a bath, or maybe there's a candle with a lavender scent, or, a diffuser, that, that's just one scent. There's lots of other essential oils that people, can use, and I know they're very popular lately. But essential oils can help. But you kind of get the gist. It's like trying to calm down. So it could be calming music, it could be lighting a candle, doing something creative. For some people, knitting or painting or just crafting or doing something creative can be a really helpful technique. Exercise, I started to say that, and just because, exercise could mean just getting out and walking around the block a few times, right? Getting outside and moving. It doesn't have to mean joining a gym and doing CrossFit, for an hour and a half every night. There's lots of different forms of exercise. I feel happy when I'm in water, so I love to swim, for example. When I go swim, it calms me down. So there's, those are lots of examples. Another thing I started to mention, positive self-talk, right? Our words are powerful. What we tell ourselves over and over again, we start to believe. So am I feeding my brain with negative words, or am I feeding my brain with positive words? Right.
Right.
And it might not be, sometimes people are like, yeah, this whole affirmation thing, not for me. But just telling ourselves, you know what, I'm going to go into that test, I'm going to give it my best. I've done everything I can to prepare, I'm going to do my best, or I've got this, or I'm going to get through this. Telling ourselves those types of messages can be really helpful. Just a few more I want to mention. Nutrition.
Wait, you reminded me of a movie that I watched called Bowfinger with Eddie Murphy and Steve Martin, where Eddie Murphy's had this character that was very anxious, and he will always, when he got anxious, his whole thing, he would say, keep it together, keep it together, keep it together. So sometimes we may have to do those things,
So, Dr. Thompson, I want you to go through those strategies, because I have one more question for the end, as we're closely soon coming up on time. So, go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to say, really noticing talk. Sleep is really important. So figuring out, so sleep hygiene. If you're staring at a screen before you go to bed, that can really activate your brain instead of calm it down.
Right. So get off of Facebook. Get off of Facebook like an hour before you go to bed, right?
Get off of the Facebook before you go to bed, like an hour or two before, if you can. Put down your phone, put away your computer. Just try to get into, a sleep mode. Take a hot shower, take a bath, put on some comfy pajamas, listen to some chill music. I mean, just things that kind of get your body ready to settle down. Caffeine can be a real big trigger of anxiety for a lot of people.
Yes.
What'd you say?
Yeah, Dr. Thompson, our technical engineers have given us the hand up, which means 5 more minutes. So we're coming up.
Actually,
two more minutes.
2 more minutes.
Here's final. I want you to, you've worked in Switzerland, Austria, in this profession, and here your bio is just so wealthy. On a final note, tell us, what is your advice, generally speaking, to parents?
Okay, so to parents, I say you got to practice this stuff yourself, because if you're practicing it yourself, you're going to notice that it's helpful for your student, right? And they've got to practice it too. And we just we have to learn how to take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's lots, and then usually, like I said, it's lots of little things. It's not usually just one big change. And, you know, your son and daughter, they're going to go through some challenges in life. There's lots of challenges, and it's like, how do you prepare them for that rather than try to shelter them from it?
So, to paraphrase what you said, if the parents are healthier, the children will also have a better chance of better health.
Absolutely.
You know, Dr. Thompson,
we want to thank you for joining us, and for our listeners, you have been watching and listening to In Session on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest radio station in the world. And we will be back with you next week talking about bipolar disorder with Michelle Claire.
Yep.
And if you want to advertise on our station, please call us at 313-355-6018 and have a wonderful week.